So we're on a new body of water here today, never been here. We're in a kind of one of those funky times of the year, that spawn, post-spawn, and we're trying to dissect it and trying to put pieces of the puzzle together. And you know, it really starts with map study. For me, it's finding those shallowest bays that are going to warm up the fastest, and then kind of work back out to the main lake from there. We're just about to pick up here and maybe go try one of those shallow bays and really start looking for those visual cues. Are we seeing wakes up shallow? Are they chasing bluegill around? If they are, that's a really big key indicator that there's some fish on beds. If we catch a few females, do they have bloody tails? Do they have sores on their sides, or are they real fresh looking still? The sores, the bloody tails, tells me that they've either spawned already or they're in the process of spawning. If they look real fresh, they maybe just got in there. So around the spawn, post-spawn period, there's a lot of visual cues that you can pick up on if you really pay attention. And we'll get after it and start breaking it down here. So map study is kind of the #1 place I start here when I'm in the springtime of the year looking for these spawning, post-spawn fish. Right now we got 2 really nice looking spawning bays here in front of us. I've never been here before, but you know, 4 foot or less, they're gonna warm up nicely, real flat in the back of them. Those are gonna be the first places these fish get to spawn here in the springtime. So we're gonna start there. If we are seeing some empty beds back in here, or maybe not a lot of activity, then we'll start to get more out on these main lake flats. Those will be the second areas where they move up to spawn. Second thing I'm looking at, water temp. It's saying 61.5 out here on the main lake. We are here in the morning hours, so you know, mid-afternoon that might be up to 63, 64. That 62 degree range is kind of the magic range here, I would say, on our natural lakes in the Midwest. So there should be some fish up in these bays. They're either spawning or done spawning, and we're not necessarily going to be looking at them and picking them off and pull down and picking them off on beds, but I'm going to cover a bunch of water with some moving baits and try and get them to react to that sort of stuff. So that's kind of how I like to fish this time of year, cover a bunch of ground, look for those fish that are, you know, irritated by a swim bait or a swim jig, and maybe they're coming up off the bed to eat it. But we'll cover a bunch of ground until we start to run into fish, and then we'll slow down and really pick it apart. So we're going to start here and see what we can find. There's a small one, probably a little male. He's right on this point leading back into this pocket here, right in some pencil reeds. So that gives us a clue that there's some active fish out here on the main lake. You know, these little points that are on the main lake with some deeper water nearby leading back into these pockets can be really good staging areas, whether it's pre-spawn or post-spawn. Those fish that wintered out on the main lake, they'll stop on a little pencil reed point like this, leading back into a spawning bay. Right now I'm just throwing a little Mayer 4-inch on a weedless swim bait hook. This is an 1/8 ounce VMC drop dead hook. Pretty easy rigging. It's got the spring on the front into the nose like that, then back through the back half of that bait, and you can kind of text pose it if you want. And it's a really good search bait. This time of year it looks like a small bluegill, and bass do not like bluegill, whether it's pre-spawn and they're up feeding up for the spawn, or if you run this thing over the top of a bed that you maybe didn't really know was there. They'll come up and they'll either get it and eat it, or they're going to show themselves. And so it's a really good way to cover water this time of year and find active areas that are holding bass. And if they do show themselves, always be ready with a backup bait, you know, whether a weightless Senko, a light Texas rig, something you can flip back in there where that fish showed you their location. And swim bait's just a little bit different look, and the weedless presentation comes through, whether it's pencil reeds, we got some lily pads here in the back, some cattails. It comes through it really well. It's a real efficient way to cover a bunch of water. The beauty of this swim bait, it's 4-inch bait, 1/8 ounce belly weight here, so not super heavy. Something that you can cast pretty well because of the salt and plastic content, but when you're reeling it back, there's one right there, you can keep it up a decent amount. And that one was right on that point, right leading back in here again. A decent little largemouth. All right, decent chunk. Now that might be a bigger male or a female that's just moving in here. You can see she's pretty fresh. No marks on her tail, no marks on her belly, and it looks like she's maybe got some eggs here. So that fish, you know, might have been staging right on that point in that shade line there, getting ready to move back into this spawning pocket. Yeah, that definitely looks like a pre-spawn female there. Right on the point leading in here. Now, we were talking about this swim bait when she interrupted us here. This thing, it'll stay up in the water column. So you can reel it kind of nice and slow if you want to, or if you want to buzz this thing on top, much like you would with a buzz toad, you can do that too. If you've got a real shallow area, maybe they've pushed way back into the mud, you can actually burn this thing too and it'll kick on the surface, kind of like a buzz bait, but it's a weedless buzz bait presentation in a way. Another thing I really like about this swim bait is the fact that we can throw it in a lot of places. And I don't got to be picking up a different rod depending on the type of cover that I'm fishing. So if I'm fishing these reeds or a little deeper water, you can slow roll it and kind of keep it under the surface. But right now we're pretty shallow in these pads, and I'm actually reeling it relatively fast to the point where that tail's kicking like a buzz bait, but it's weedless, so it comes right through that stuff so well. And around the spawn, you know, these fish will relate to pads quite a bit because there's a root system underneath those pads, and that can be a key place. If they don't have preferred hard bottom elsewhere, they'll sweep out, you know, at the base of the pads, and they'll spawn on that root system. You know, now here we're all of a sudden in some reeds and we can slow it down and kind of wake it below the surface. You can certainly buzz it through here too, but with those lily pads, you know, the biggest pain is every pad has kind of a little crotch in the middle of it, and it has a tendency to catch your bait and ruin your cast. But with this weedless swim bait, it just effortlessly comes right through that stuff. There's one right on the edge. It's not a bad one. Oh, there we go. Right on the edge of the pads. Not a huge one, but pretty fun size. Looks like probably a little male would be my guess. That one was right on the edge of those pads. You can see it's a little beat up right on the top side there. That could be from spawning. A little bit on the tail, but probably a male that, you know, maybe has spawned already. We're kind of at the mouth of what looks like a spawning pocket here, and that fish was just right on the inside edge of those lilies there. So pretty typical spot. It's a good indicator that there's some fish around these pads. They look so good, you know, for fish that are coming and going. But that's kind of all part of the process. This is a new lake for us. Can't expect to land on them right away every time. We might have to get back out on that main lake and fish some of those pencil reeds that they might be either spawning or staging in, or even some of these docks on the edge of these shallow bays can be really good staging areas in the springtime. So we'll keep bouncing around. As the day moves on and it gets a little warmer, these areas can really fire off too. So If you're getting some bites in an area, but it's not on fire, never rule out the afternoon as well. There's one. We just missed that one a second ago. He's not a real big one, just another small male again. But it's a bass up here in a shallow bay. That one's maybe been spawning already too. It's got a little sore on it. That could be from another fish trying to eat it, but just a little male up here. We're pretty shallow now. We're about 1.5 feet, and that one was cruising up here kind of on the inside edge. The water goes quite a bit back beyond these cattails. We'll see how shallow it gets back there. Maybe they're up there in the dirt. That's our 3rd fish in the area. So there's activity here. We've had a few blow-ups, some missed bites, but I wouldn't say they're absolutely stacked in here. So there's definitely a lot more lake to explore, I feel like, until we maybe feel like we've got this thing figured out a little better. There's one on the swim bait. That one was sitting right on that bed there. So, key indicator of a spawner. Bunch of empty beds right around here. And that was like out of the 10, 15 we've seen, that's about the only fish I've seen sitting on a bed. When you get into these areas where you've located a spawning pocket, occasionally you're going to come across cruisers, and those might be females that are pre-spawn, that are moving back in here. They're maybe sunning their eggs on a nice sandy spot like this, or they're post-spawners that they're done spawning, they're not locked on a bed, they're working their way back out to the main lake. So keep your eye open, especially under calm conditions. You're probably going to start to see some cruisers in those areas, and a phenomenal way to pick them off is with a wacky rig stick bait. This is a pig stick from the Crush City line. We've got the crossover band on there, and then a number 1 VMC Nico. One thing I really like about this pig stick is it's super soft. So on that fall, it's going to give you a really good shimmy. It's got a neat little indentation in the middle there to keep that crossover band. But keep a wacky rig on hand around the spawn, not just to pick off fish that are spawning, but you know, a lot of times you're going to see cruisers in those areas too. You know, the water isn't super clear. We got a little bit of a breeze today, so we're not up, you know, sight fishing for them per se, but I can see well enough that I can see these light spots on the bottom 10, 20, 30, 40 feet out in front of the boat. And one of the most effective ways to catch fish that are around those light spots, which are, you know, they're probably spawning or just done spawning, is throwing a wacky rig at those fish. There we go, there's one right there. There's a little bit of a light spot out in front of us. This isn't a great big one, but a prime example of how effective a wacky rig can be around the spawn when you get into these areas where there's tons of beds. Now you can see, as we get closer here, there's the light spot that I could see from a distance. I didn't see the fish sitting there, but you can see the light spot. You can almost envision a fish being there. And this wacky rig is just so deadly. It just sits there and kind of hovers in that area, and you have a really good chance of picking off any sort of fish that's relating to that spot. And usually, you know, instead of getting up on those fish and throwing at them several times in a row, it seems like the longer you're there throwing at them, the smarter they get. And so if you can stay back and use your eyes to find out, there's another one there on that light spot. There's another light spot over there. Just pitch the wacky rig to it, and right away, decent fish. All right, there we go. Another example, wacky rig on the light spots. Super effective way to catch fish around the spawn, and you don't need to get up close and pitch at them a bunch. They're usually gonna bite on that first cast if they're sitting there. Decent one up here. We finally got in an area with decent amount of fish cruising. There's some fish on beds, and we've just been slowing down with this wacky rig. You know, earlier in the day it was throwing that swim bait primarily, somewhat swim jig, and you know, we got a few bites doing that, but it really just wasn't happening. You know, we caught a few, but not like we expected we should. And now we're starting to get a few more bites. That was a little bit better quality one. And that's kind of just a testament to really slowing down with the wacky rig during the spawn can really be effective. You know, that swim bait and swim jig can help you get in the right areas and locate fish. But once you get into an area where you're seeing a bunch of beds, this thing is about as deadly as it gets during the spawn. Is, you know, wacky rig, this is a Crush City pig stick. We got a VMC crossover band on there, and just throwing it around, blind casting a bit while we're looking, but also if we see a light spot. Really effective way to catch some fish. You know, I threw up into this area not really knowing what was here, but now that we got up here, I'm actually seeing some rhizomes. And if I had to guess, that fish was spawning right on that lily pad root there. I didn't see it, but we blind casted in an area, slowed down, really covered it thoroughly, and I would imagine that that's where that fish was sitting. So that's a pretty good indicator that we're post-spawn right now for the most part. And so if I were to come back here tomorrow and have to continue to break this lake down, I'd probably spend less time in these shallow bays and start looking more main lake. You probably find some spawners on the main lake, but there might be fish starting to set up offshore too. You know, shallower points outside of these spawning pockets is probably where I would start. Key indicator, bunch of empty beds, right? So I'd say it looks like a majority of these fish are post-spawn right now.